James is one of the three disciples whom Jesus chose to be with him at certain key moments. He was there with Peter and John when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. He was there on the mountaintop to witness the transfiguration of Jesus and the appearance of Moses and Elijah. He was there in the Garden of Gethsemane, close enough, in fact, to hear Jesus pray, if only he, like the others, hadn't been so sleepy. Jesus trusted these three and wanted them with him when things happened. It was always Peter, James, and John. There are actually several people with the name of James in the Bible, of course. This, for instance, is not the author of the book of James in the New Testament, nor is this the other apostle who is often called James the Less, because he probably was the younger of the two. This James was the brother of John, both sons of Zebedee, who were fishermen on the Sea of Galilee when Jesus called them to become his disciples. They, like Peter and Andrew, left everything and followed Jesus. Later on, we learn something very important about James the Greater from a story that we find in the 9th chapter of Luke's Gospel. At that time, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem, so we are told. They were passing through Samaria and came to a village, but the people there did not welcome him, so we are told. It wasn't just about Jesus. In general, the Jewish people and the Samaritans did not like each other. There were some notable times, however, when Jesus bridged that gap, as with the woman at the well, for instance. This time, James and his brother John were angry because of their blatant violation of the most basic law of hospitality. They saw themselves as victims of pure prejudice, aimed at them because they were Jews. Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? James asked Jesus. This may be why James and John had also earned the nickname Sons of Thunder. Quite obviously, they could be a little temperamental. As one writer said, you don't get a nickname like Sons of Thunder for no reason. But that is how Jesus' disciples, James and John, were known. They were rough-hewn guys, amazing, colorful characters. They would not back away from a confrontation. In fact, they might even have looked forward to one. They could be very aggressive, but they could also be very insensitive. Jesus himself had indeed once told them, if people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. He did not, however, ever tell them to rain fire and brimstone upon them too. So Jesus turned that day and rebuked James and John, so we are told. Then he and his disciples went to another village. The story is notable for what didn't happen. There was no fiery destruction from on high. That does not mean, however, that it couldn't have happened. Prophets of old had often used their power to curse those who opposed them. Jesus just wasn't that kind of prophet. We live in a time now when angry words are offered up like trading cards, and even anger itself is encouraged as a virtue. It isn't a virtue. And in fact, it is often why bad things happen. Fueled by anger, small offenses can quickly turn deadly, as in many road rage incidents, for instance. In 1994, a man and a woman and their 2 children were traveling on a Chicago freeway when another man cut in front of them, forcing him to brake and swerve to keep from hitting him. The car then sped off, but the now angry driver pursued him, and finally catching up, he rolled down his window and began yelling and screaming at the driver. Finally, the other driver pulled out a gun and fired. The bullet hit their baby girl, leaving her blind in one eye, partially deaf, with severe and physical disabilities for the rest of her life. Yes, they caught the man, and yes, he went to jail, but does it really matter? By giving in to his anger, this father had brought about the moment that changed their lives forever. It was Mark Twain who once said, anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything upon which it is poured. We have somehow mistakenly decided that anger is okay, that it is even a righteous thing to be angry. We are now addicted to the very feeling of being angry. And because of that, we have ignored the great consequences to our soul. Whatever is begun in anger ends in shame, Benjamin Franklin wrote, and in my experience, he is right. Admittedly, if Jesus had been one to just preach anger instead of love, he could have attracted way more attention and respect in Palestine. The people were ready for anger. They were ready for a rebellion. Instead, however, Jesus told them that they should love one another and go the extra mile, even for those who oppressed them. What if Jesus had actually empowered his disciples that day to bring on the thunder? What if he had allowed them to destroy that Samaritan village? That certainly would have made the rulers in Jerusalem think twice before they arrested Jesus. You might have some doubt that they actually had any ability to do that. But do you doubt that Jesus could have done so? Jesus once told them, "Whatever you ask in my name, that will I do." So maybe as his disciples, they could do that too. We know that all of the apostles died a martyr's death. So you might well wonder why they didn't just ask Jesus to destroy their enemies instead. The surprising answer is because they no longer had any enemies. Because their mission now was to save the world. You can't do that and hate anyone. Jesus himself set the example by dying on the cross instead of unleashing a multitude of angels to destroy Jerusalem that day. Jesus had shown them a more excellent way, the way of love. I have long believed that this faith reality puts all of us in the very awkward position of actually having more power than we could possibly imagine, although we do not know it, and yet being constantly constrained by the Lord's commandment to love one another every day, all the time. If we give anger a place to live within us, then it will just get in the way of our mission, because anger is incompatible with Christian teaching. You cannot love someone and wish them harm at the same time. But let me tell you a little more about James now. We know that after the resurrection, James stayed in Jerusalem. We also know that James was the first of the apostles to die. In fact, his death in 44 AD is actually the only death of an apostle that is recorded in the Bible. The suicidal death of Judas Iscariot, of course, is also in the Bible, but he was not one of the apostles commissioned and empowered by Jesus to go into all the world with good news. You will find the death of James the Great recorded in a single verse in the 12th chapter of Acts. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them, so we are told. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. That is it. That is all we know with certainty. Although there also exists a legend told by Eusebius of Caesarea centuries later. In his church history, Eusebius wrote of James the Great that it appears that the guard who brought him into the court was so moved when he saw him testify that he confessed that he too was a Christian. So they were both taken away together, and on the way, he asked James to forgive him. James thought for a moment, and then he said, "I wish you peace," and kissed him. So both were beheaded at the same time. So it seems that in the end, even one of the sons of thunder learned how to let go of his anger and embrace the power of forgiveness and walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Maybe we can too. Be safe, and God bless you.